My husband's family mocked my art at his sister's party, then handed me divorce papers. They laughed. I stayed silent. But I had something in my purse that would change everything. It wasn't just paint they dismissed. It was me. So I let them serve their papers while I held the deed. They thought I'd cry. I smiled instead. It happened right in front of the champagne tower. The music hadn't even stopped when his mother said, "You'll find the envelope under your plate." I thought it was a thank you card. It wasn't. It was a divorce notice. His sister Whitney was still smirking, glass in hand. Like she'd won something. Everyone knew. Everyone watched. And no one looked surprised. I felt heat rise in my chest. Not just from the embarrassment, but from every time they called my studio a phase. From every time Evan stayed silent. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, because while they were toasting to my ending, they had no idea what I'd kept in my purse. For a moment just like this. It didn't start at the party. Not really. The way they looked at me started long before that, like I was something Evan picked up during an impulsive phase, and eventually he'd put me back down. I met his family for the first time at his father's retirement dinner. His mother Joanne wore a champagne silk dress and a permanent half-smile that made you feel like you'd spilled wine on her rug even when you hadn't. She called me creative, the way people call a child's crayon mess ambitious. I tried. God, I tried. I brought dessert to every Sunday dinner. I complimented the wallpaper. I offered to help Whitney plan her baby shower, even though she barely looked at me when she talked. I smiled when they dismissed my art as a hobby. "It's not that we don't support you," Joanne had said once, hands folded like a queen in court. "It's just, some of us were raised to value stability." Evan never said a word. The truth is, I didn't expect them to love me right away. But I thought, eventually, they'd at least respect me. That if I showed up enough, if I said all the right things, if I let their barbs bounce off me with grace, they'd let me in. They didn't. Whitney was the worst. Her voice always sounded like a compliment wrapped in a blade. "You know, I actually envy you," she told me once at brunch. "You don't worry about status. Or presentation. That must be so freeing." I laughed. Because what else do you do when someone's insulting your existence and calling it praise? Meanwhile, my art was growing. Slowly, quietly. I sold my first painting to a small cafe owner in Cambridge, then another to a retired therapist who cried in front of it for 5 straight minutes before handing me her credit card. I told Evan. He smiled, distracted. "That's great, babe." He didn't ask what the pieces were. He never came to the shows. The studio behind our house became my world. A repurposed shed with paint-stained floors and light that poured in through a slanted skylight. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Until Joanne called it that backyard shack during dinner with some cousins. "I think it's charming," someone offered politely. Joanne sipped her wine. "Charming isn't sustainable." Evan laughed. So did Whitney. So I laughed too. That was my role. The good sport. The grateful guest. The woman who could take a joke. But it wasn't a joke anymore when Joanne forgot to include me on the invitation for their family ski trip, or when Whitney posted photos of her baby's birthday and I realized I was cropped out of every single one. And still I stayed. I told myself they didn't mean harm. That Evan was just stuck between two worlds. That I'd chosen this and choosing meant enduring. Then came the night before the party. Whitney's birthday bash. She'd booked a rooftop venue overlooking the bay. Evan was in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone, and I asked casually if she needed help setting up. He blinked. She didn't ask for help. She said the guest list's tight anyway. I froze. "Oh," I said, because what else was there to say? "I'm sure you'll be fine," he added, already looking back at the screen. That was when something cracked. Not loud, not obvious. Just a small fracture inside me. A shift. I'd been painting a piece in secret for Whitney. Not to impress her, God, no. But because despite everything, I wanted to show up. It was a portrait. Soft. Subtle. Her holding her daughter, not posing but in motion, laughing, mid-mess, hair undone. Human. I wrapped it carefully. Bought a deep green bow to match the invitation theme. Evan didn't even ask what it was. He just said, "You sure you want to bring that?" I nodded. He shrugged. We arrived late. Not that anyone noticed. The room was golden with string lights, champagne flutes, catered sushi. Whitney hugged Evan, barely glanced at me. I handed her the gift. She smiled that same polite smile people give when they're about to rewrap your present and give it to someone else. But she opened it. Right there. In front of everyone. Silence. Then a snort from someone near the dessert table. Whitney held up the painting and laughed. "Oh wow. This is so expressive." She turned it so others could see. Joanne leaned over, narrowed her eyes. Well, it certainly captures something. Evan said nothing. Someone muttered, "Is that supposed to be her?" Whitney smiled, teeth sharp. "It's interpretive." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel. Not loudly. Not overtly. But it was the kind of laughter that says, "We've already decided who you are. And it's not enough." I stood there, wine glass in hand, heart racing. And then Joanne clinked her glass. "Before we move on to cake," she said sweetly, "Evan has something to share." He looked surprised. A flicker of guilt, maybe. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. My name was on it. I opened it. Divorce papers. The room hushed like a breath had been collectively sucked in. Joanne smiled. "We thought it would be gentler." With family present, Whitney finished. And I just stood there. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't move, because in that moment, they thought they'd won. But what they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this long before they ever drafted that paperwork. I didn't speak that night. Not on the ride home. Not when Evan tried to explain himself with vague phrases like "we drifted" and "you were always somewhere else." He said, "It's not personal." And I laughed quietly, because it was only personal. What he meant was, it was no longer convenient to love someone who couldn't be shaped. What he meant was, his family had never accepted me, and now he wouldn't fight them on it. He slept in the guest room. I slept in the studio. That night, under the warm hum of my desk lamp, I pulled out the manila envelope I'd been keeping for over a year. Inside, a deed. Signed. Witnessed. A legal transfer of ownership, this house, the land it stood on, the studio behind it, put into my name on the night of our 6th anniversary, when Evan was drunk and sentimental and trying to prove he wasn't like the rest of his family. He'd signed it with a flourish. He didn't remember a thing. I did. I hadn't filed it right away. I didn't want to own the house out of spite. I wanted to feel like I belonged in it. But now? Now I realized I didn't need to belong. I needed to be free. The next morning, I called Gloria, my attorney. She didn't ask questions. Just said, "Let's move." By noon, we filed the deed officially with the county office. By evening, I had a draft notice of eviction in my inbox, typed, formatted, and ready to be delivered. Not yet, I told her. Soon. But not yet. First, I needed space. To think. To decide what this break, this ending, this humiliation, was going to mean. I packed a small bag and left the house. Drove 3 hours north to a cabin Lindsay's cousin rented seasonally, but had left empty for the fall. Lindsay met me there with 2 bottles of wine, a sack of groceries, and the kind of silence only a real friend knows how to hold. I stayed up late that night, curled under a quilt, staring at the dark wood beams and letting the quiet wrap around me. I wasn't sad anymore. I was raw, like the top layer of myself had been scraped clean. And in that space, underneath all the trying, all the enduring, I found something sharp. Not bitterness. Not revenge. Clarity. Direction. For 6 years, I'd tried to make myself palatable. Now I'd make myself unmissable. I spent the next day drafting a plan. Not just to leave, but to rebuild. To reclaim. To create something out of the ashes they thought they'd left me in. They mocked my art? Fine. I'd turn the very house they tried to erase me from into something they couldn't ignore. The gallery idea had been living in me for years. A place for rejected pieces. For artists who didn't fit the mold. For creations too messy, too bold, too strange for acceptance, but too alive to be hidden. I called it the Haven. The name came easy, because that's what I needed. Not vengeance, but a place where I could breathe. Where others could too. Lindsay read the plan and said, "You're insane." Then she smiled. "Let's do it." She connected me with her cousin, the one who worked in local preservation. He said the estate had historic potential. Said there were grants for exactly this kind of project. I filed the applications before I could second-guess myself. By the end of the week, contractors were walking the property. Gloria was handling the paperwork. And I stood in the empty dining room where Joanne had once made me iron the napkins twice, because guests notice. I looked around and thought, this room isn't theirs anymore. It's mine, and soon, it would belong to everyone who ever felt like their voice didn't fit the script. That night, I opened a new canvas. Fresh, white, unmarked, and I dipped my brush into a deep, blood-red tone. I wasn't angry. I was ready. 2 weeks after filing the deed, I returned to the house. Not as Evan's wife. Not as Joanne's disappointment. But as the legal owner of the Harrington estate. I didn't knock. I rang the bell. Because I had every right to. Evan answered, surprised, his posture uncertain. He stepped aside automatically, like muscle memory hadn't caught up to the new reality. The living room still smelled like old wood polish and expensive perfume. But it didn't feel like home. It felt like a showroom of people pretending to belong. Joanne was on the couch, flipping through a magazine like she hadn't orchestrated my public humiliation. Whitney stood by the bar cart, sipping something with too much garnish. They all turned when I entered, like I was the intruder. I placed the folder on the coffee table, a soft thud that sounded louder than it should have. Joanne raised an eyebrow. What's this supposed to be? Notice to vacate, I said. Calm. Clear. You have 30 days. The room stilled. Evan picked up the papers, skimming the pages. This can't be right. It's filed. Stamped. Legal. I met his eyes. You signed the deed over last year. I just finalized it. Joanne stood, voice sharp. You tricked him. No, I said. You just underestimated me. Whitney scoffed. This is insane. This house is a legacy. I smiled, just slightly. Legacies can be repurposed. Joanne's hands trembled as she reached for the folder. You won't get away with this. We have lawyers. Friends on the city council. Already reviewed. Already approved. I cut in, each word deliberate. The haven is coming. And this house is its heart. Evan sat down like the weight finally hit him. Why? That made me pause. He really didn't get it. Because you handed me divorce papers like they were a favor, I said. Because your mother called my life's work a phase. Because you all laughed, and I didn't. Joanne's mouth opened, then closed. I turned toward the door. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to rebuild. As I walked out, no one followed. No shouting. No begging. Just silence, thick and sharp. And that told me everything I needed to know. That night, I stood alone in the upstairs hallway, where they once hung portraits of great-grandfathers and golf tournaments. I imagined future walls filled with raw sketches, untamed brushstrokes, stories told in color and chaos. This house had been a symbol of exclusion for generations. Now it would become a sanctuary. For every artist they'd dismiss. For every woman they called too emotional, too much, or not enough. I wasn't here to erase the past. I was here to paint over it. With something honest. Something mine. The first thing to go was the chandelier. It used to hang in the foyer like a crown, all crystal and gold, casting judgment on anyone who stepped inside. Joanne had once told me it's antique French, handpicked for elegance. I had it packed up and donated to a local theater company. They sent me a thank you card and 2 tickets to their fall performance. Next went the wallpaper, peeling back layers of curated tradition, room by room. Beneath the floral prints and beige perfection, the walls were cracked, uneven, human. I liked them better that way. The contractors worked fast. I walked the halls with rolled-up blueprints, coffee in one hand, paint samples in the other. I wasn't trying to erase what had been. I was reshaping it, room by room, story by story. In what used to be the formal dining room, where I was handed divorce papers in front of a room full of people, I envisioned the central exhibit. A flipped table. Shattered glass frozen in resin. Fragments of china reassembled into new shapes. I started designing the piece myself. Not out of spite, but because I needed to anchor the memory somewhere real. Somewhere I could look at it and say, I survived that. Lindsay came by almost every afternoon. She brought food, laughter, ideas. She was my grounding force through the chaos. One day, as we were taping off a doorway for paint, she turned to me. You ever think you'd actually go through with this? I paused, then said no. But now I can't imagine doing anything else. Professor Bennett came by that weekend. My old restoration professor, gray hair, thick glasses, paint under his nails like he never stopped working. He walked through the space slowly, nodding. This is good, he said. Different, but good. Then he looked at me. They finally pushed you hard enough, huh? I smiled. They gave me the gift of letting go. He stayed for hours, helping me decide which spaces could be adapted into classrooms, which needed more light. By sunset, we'd mapped out an entire restoration wing in what used to be the guest suites. That same night, I opened an email from a small art publication. They wanted to run a feature on the Haven before its opening. Attached was a simple question, why now? I stared at the blinking cursor, then typed, because the place where I was once broken is now where others will begin. 2 days later, a collector from Chicago offered to sponsor the youth program. Then came the local grant. Then a quiet message from the Smithsonian's Community Engagement Coordinator asking for a call. The ripple had begun. Meanwhile, the Harringtons were silent. No calls. No lawsuits. No last-minute retaliation. Joanne's silence, especially, felt deliberate. Calculated. Like she was waiting for a crack to show. A weakness. Something she could twist into leverage. But I didn't give her one. The house became louder with life each day. Apprentices. Painters. Volunteers sanding down frames, cataloging materials, planning opening night. I hired Marcus, a retired Marine with a background in private security, to handle front gate access. He took his job seriously, clipboard in hand, earpiece in place, even though most of the time he was just escorting delivery vans and nodding at neighbors. But I needed boundaries now. Not out of fear. Out of clarity. I didn't owe them access anymore. Not to the house. Not to me. Then, one afternoon, as I was reviewing the lighting plan for the central hall, Marcus buzzed in. "Miss Marla," he said, voice low. "There's someone at the gate." Brandon Harrington. I froze. Brandon. Whitney's husband. Joanne's golden child. He'd always been the quiet enforcer. Not cruel like Joanne, not smug like Whitney, but still complicit. Always looking the other way. Did he say what he wants? I asked. Says it's personal. Urgent. I looked out the tall windows at the drive. Then back at the portrait in my hands. One of a girl standing in a storm, arms open to the rain. "Let him into the outdoor reception area," I said. But not the house. 5 minutes later, I stepped onto the porch. Brandon stood with his hands in the pockets of a navy coat, eyes tired. "Marla," he said. "Thanks for seeing me. You have 5 minutes." He hesitated. "Whitney, she's pregnant." I said nothing. "She wants to come back. We were hoping the house might still be available this spring. For the baby." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the house you watched your family hand me divorce papers in?" He winced. "It's complicated." "No," I said. "It's actually very simple. This house isn't yours anymore." He tried again. "We grew up here. It's part of our legacy. That should mean something." I stepped forward, holding out a stamped copy of the final architectural plans. "It does mean something," I said. "It means change. It means purpose. And it means your family no longer gets to decide who belongs." He looked down at the papers. Silent. Before he could respond, I turned and walked back inside, the door clicking shut behind me. That night, I stood in the gallery's entry hall alone. I placed a single spotlight above the empty wall where the centerpiece would hang. Not out of ego, but to make sure no one ever forgot. What happens when a woman stops asking to be included and starts building the future herself? The email came just before midnight. Sender, Harrington and Company. Legal. Subject line, offer of purchase, Willow Avenue property. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it. Let it sit. Let it hum quietly in the inbox like something rotting behind a sealed door. They were trying to buy it back. Twice the market value. All in cash. With discretion guaranteed. I forwarded it to Gloria. Her reply came 3 minutes later. "You know what to do." I did. I responded with one sentence. "I'm not interested in money. I'm interested in meaning." 2 days later, Marcus buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Brandon. It was Joanne. Black coat, tight bun, holding something in her hands, Marcus said. "Wants to talk. Says she's alone." "Let her in," I said. But only to the reception room. She entered slowly, heels echoing across the floor like they were performing for ghosts. She looked thinner. Paler. The fire in her eyes had dimmed, but the steel was still there. She placed a carefully wrapped canvas on the table. Then peeled back the fabric. An old portrait. A woman with soft curls and a far-off gaze. The painting was cracked, dusty and delicate, worn thin by time. "This is my mother," Joanne said, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I found it in the attic. I'd forgotten it was even there." I said nothing, just examined the surface. It needed cleaning, relining, color correction. It could be saved, but it would take time. Joanne took a breath. "I know I wronged you." I looked up. "I dismissed your work. I mocked your passion. I tried to make you feel small so I could stay in control." She paused. "And when everything collapsed, when the press started calling, when the lawyers pulled out, I realized the only thing still standing was you. And this." She glanced around at the building, no longer a house. Not really. Not in the way she remembered it. "I'm not here to argue," she said. "I'm here to ask if there's a place for someone like me to begin again." For a moment, I said nothing. Then I sat across from her. "I can restore this painting," I said. "But it will never be exactly the same." Joanne frowned slightly. "And that's a good thing," I added. "The cracks are part of the truth. They make it real. They make it worth something." Her eyes shimmered, just a little. "If you want to learn," I said, "I can offer you a role here. Administrative work. Cataloging. Shadowing the restoration team." Joanne looked surprised. "You trust me with that?" No, I said. But I'll trust you to earn it. She nodded slowly. Thank you. That evening, I was setting up the studio when Lindsay came in holding a letter. It's handwritten, she said. No return address. I opened it. If these walls could speak. I hope they tell the story of someone who turned brokenness into light. B. I stood for a long time after that, the letter in my hands, the room quiet. The next morning, I stepped into the central gallery with a cup of black coffee and watched the sun cut through the skylight and land on the blank wall where the main piece would go. It was time. The exhibit was called Reclamation. At the center, a massive canvas. Torn paper, broken glass, layers of pigment and grief. In the middle, a woman standing tall, surrounded by chaos. Her hand gripped a brush. Her mouth slightly open, mid-word. Her eyes, unflinching, forward-facing. A voice. The opening night came fast. Too fast. Guests flooded in, artists, journalists, strangers with stories in their eyes. I stood off to the side, unseen, watching them walk through the space I'd reclaimed. Then someone whispered, I heard this used to be the Harrington house. Someone else replied, now it's something better. I smiled. When the speeches began, I stepped to the podium under soft lights. This place was once filled with silence, I said. With expectations, with judgment. Tonight, it's filled with stories and censored, unapologetic, and finally, heard. When I pulled the cloth from the painting, the room went still. Then came the applause. Not for the colors. Not for the brushwork. But for the truth. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't revenge. This was release. This was me. The next week, the gallery stayed full. School groups toured the hallways. Young artists asked questions. Journalists scribbled quotes and circled back for follow-ups. But not everything that followed came in applause. Some of it came in whispers. Marcus intercepted a visitor at the gate, a man in a tailored suit holding a folder marked urgent. Inside were documents related to the Harringtons' financial holdings. A quiet investigation was unfolding. Harrington Capital was under federal scrutiny. Missing funds. Falsified records. Properties leveraged behind closed doors. Including the estate they once tried to throw me out of. I read the notice twice. Then called Gloria. You're fine, she said firmly. You filed first. You own it outright. If they had succeeded in pushing you out, this house would have gone down with them. I stared out the front windows, heart pounding. Not from fear. From the realization that everything I'd built could have vanished overnight. If I had stayed quiet just a little longer. That night, I was sealing the edges of a frame when my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then listened. It was Whitney. Her voice was hoarse. Strained. Marla. I have nowhere else to go. Brandon's gone. My mother's been subpoenaed. I'm about to give birth and I have no home. No money. No one. I know I don't deserve this. But if there's any space, a couch, a floor, just until the baby comes. I sat there, brush still in hand. And I remembered her laughing at my painting, her smirk the night of the party. But I also remembered what it felt like to have no one. I called Marcus. Reset the code for the guest house, I said. She can stay there. Until she finds another way. Whitney arrived 3 hours later. No heels. No designer bag. Just a duffel and a swollen belly. She didn't say much. Just thank you. And I nodded. Not for you. For the child. The guest house was clean. Stocked. Quiet. She would have her privacy. And I would have mine. Days passed. She didn't intrude. She helped when asked. And one morning, she knocked lightly on the studio door. I signed up for the community class, she said, eyes shy. Restoration techniques. I thought, maybe it'd help me understand the things I once dismissed. I blinked, surprised. But said nothing, just nodded. The baby came on a Sunday. Healthy. Blue-eyed. She named him Isaac. Unexpected joy, she told me, voice soft. I held him once. Briefly. He yawned in my arms and clenched my finger like he already knew I wouldn't let him fall. That evening, Whitney left a small note on my desk. I'm not the same woman I was. But I'd like to learn how to become someone better. Thank you for letting me begin here. I tucked it away between pages of my sketchbook. Not as a symbol of forgiveness, but of transformation. Hers. Mine. Ours. By the end of the month, she had applied to the city's heritage restoration training. Joanne had officially joined the administrative team. Quiet. Efficient. Humbled. They no longer felt like invaders in my story. They were. Support characters in a new chapter. One that I authored. In the evenings, I'd walk the halls after everyone left. The walls glowed with stories. Some hung in paint. others still in progress. And in the quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because the pain never happened, but because I had used it to build something more honest. Something real. Something free. Spring arrived slowly, brushing the brick walls of the haven in soft gold. Lavender bloomed by the walkway. The student garden out back had started to take shape, overturned earth, paint-speckled gloves drying on the porch rail. One morning, Marcus called through the intercom. "She's back," he said. "Joanne. Alone. She's holding something again." "Let her in," I replied. She entered the reception room the same way she had the first time, quietly, deliberately, like stepping into something sacred. In her hands was another wrapped canvas. But this one was newer. She set it down, unwrapped it, and stood back. "I found this last month," she said. "A painting I bought when I was in college, before I met my husband. Before everything became about appearances. It was abstract. Messy. Bold lines in red and deep gray. Nothing like the family portraits she used to hang in the foyer. I had forgotten I even liked art," she said. Then looked at me. "Until you reminded me what it feels like to make space for something real." She didn't ask for it to be restored. She didn't need to. We hung it in the side hallway, between a piece by a high school student and another from a woman who'd spent 15 years caring for her father and hadn't painted since college. It belonged there. Not because it was perfect, but because it was true. Joanne showed up each morning after that. In her standard gray cardigan, hair tied back, ready to check inventory or prepare invoices or sweep the studio if needed. She said little, but she listened closely, and she never once asked for credit. Whitney, meanwhile, had moved to a small apartment nearby. She came to community class twice a week, often with Isaac strapped to her chest. Sometimes I caught her sketching quietly in the courtyard. She never showed me her work, and I never asked. Forgiveness doesn't always look like a reunion. Sometimes it's just space, held without resentment, offered without performance. One afternoon, I stood in the central gallery alone. The late sun caught the edges of the glass sculpture hanging above, the one made from fragments of the chandelier I once stood beneath. It glowed, not broken, transformed. I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who smiled through insults, who tried to earn love from people who only offered control. I didn't hate her. She survived. And because of her, I had this. A space filled with light and voice and second chances. The gate buzzer rang. Another tour. Another story ready to begin. As I walked toward the door, I whispered to myself, soft, steady. This isn't revenge. It's restoration. And in that, I was finally free.